Well,
Hello.
hey, what's up, man?
Hey, yeah, sorry I was running behind, man. I was just trying to get a lot of stuff done right before.
So
You
when
good
I
way.
planned this, I was planning on having Saturday off, but then it rained Tuesday, so it fucked up my Tuesday, and then I couldn't do what I was supposed to do Wednesday because it was too wet.
Damn.
So I got to work tomorrow. So we got to keep this at like an hour.
Okay. Yeah, let's do it. I can go a little over
Brandon,
whatever. I'm not
Brandon's
doing
got
anything
to
tonight.
what?
I'm not doing anything tonight, so if we go a little over, it's fine. But I'm cool with not keeping it too late. I got to work tomorrow anyway.
Oh yeah, yeah. I got to be up at like 4 or 5, between 4 and 5. I got to Um, but Brandon's got a link. Let's just roll right into it. We'll do the intro and we can get started. And whenever he shows up, he shows up. You hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. All right. You want to just go into it right now?
Yeah, let's just roll.
Do you want to switch up the intro at all?
I guess, yeah. Why not?
Yeah, I was thinking about going to something a little more simple. All right, let's do it. 3, 2, 1. All right, we're back. Welcome to the Agora Podcast. Welcome back to the Agora Podcast. Sek, how you doing?
I'm doing all right, man. Living the dream. Been
Long
very, very
time, huh?
busy. Got a newborn and I got a sick toddler. So it's been a wild couple of days.
Yes. A new addition to the family. Congratulations. First time we've recorded since then.
I think so, yeah. Yeah.
Definitely.
Well, it's been we've had our hands full for sure.
Yeah, so we've taken some time off from recording. I've got a new job. You've got a new child, so that's really really awesome.
Yeah, congratulations on that, by the way. You like it?
Yeah, it's good. I haven't started yet, but practically there. My first day's Monday.
Oh, sweet. Awesome.
Yeah, looking forward to it. Yeah, I'm in a really bad place right now, and still going to be in a bad place, but I'm in a better place because I have a new job. So I'm just gonna make the best of things as they are. But oof, I gotta tell you, things have sucked. I was in no mood or position or condition to record a podcast. I think for the
I know
fall
how this is.
season. Yeah. So, and I was like, well, okay, we had some. Once I knew I was going to start a new job, because I don't know if I'm pretty sure I mentioned it to you. I'll be off. I'm working Monday to Friday, like strictly, and so that kind of solves the scheduling problem that's been really eating at us recording and everything. So obviously this is a weekend before that, but we wanted to get one in since it was the Thanksgiving weekend.
Yep, little extra time. So that'll be good. You'll be able to record. We'll be able to record on the weekends more, and that'll make life easy. So,
Yeah, looking
so
forward
we
to it.
might have a guest coming. They have the invite, but you know how scheduling goes. And I swore long ago that I would never again get into arguments about the non-aggression principle, but that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. Um, and essentially, where are the limits to the non-aggression principle? Um, is it an um, absolute principle? Does it have any exceptions? Something along those lines. And actually, I wanted to ask you, man, like, what does Islam say about aggression and when it is proper to use force?
Well, it really depends on looking at the practical reality. And yes, that's the actually I was going to tie this in a different way, but that's yeah, I don't think that a typical libertarian view of the non-aggression principle is sort of in line with the Islamic view. Obviously, within an Islamic society, obviously we have to treat our fellow Muslims very well, as well as other people that were like in part of our society as well. Obviously, the history has looked very different, as it has throughout the world, in relations between Muslims and others. So there's tend to be a lot of aggression in both directions. Um, and you can't ignore the history, even though we like the foundational parts of our religion come from the very early history, so a few decades of the very early Islamic history, and then a few following decades after that. Slightly less important than that. But yeah, there tended to be a lot of aggression. Obviously, in the very early story of the prophethood, there's will be a lot of aggression towards the very small and nascent Muslim community. But no, I mean, just like most societies that, and there's a lot of disagreement as to like how natural the evolution. I think it was obviously like the God's plan. I mean, what happened, and what happened wasn't always the smoothest, the most straightforward thing. But how much the very quickly growing empire, and then what became empires and a whole series of long history of many centuries, came to came out of the original religion that was preached, or there are even theories that are just to us obviously very blasphemous or crackpot theories that the empire basically came first and the rest was made up to justify it, which is absolutely, I don't even know where you could get that from, but yeah, I mean there's really,
are we talking about the Ottomans here?
No. I mean,
Oh,
just the early Islamic expansion immediately,
okay.
immediately during the life of the Prophet, something was something immediately after. But long story short,
Okay.
there's Brandon. We'll introduce him in just a second. But I'll finish my answer. Long story short, obviously there's been a history of statehood, aggression, wars, an empire to an extent, and for better or for worse, and to this and everything. Since then, when it comes to obviously living in a harmonious empire, yeah, it depends. It depends. Are you part of this system or are you not? Are you part of this moral system or are you not? Because you could be part of all sorts of moral systems. What exists at the time? There were everybody, and I don't know if they're actually Vikings, but they were everybody from like pirates and raiders and empire. Say they exactly a non-aggression principle in the way that libertarians specifically talk about it, in the sense that you look at a very sort of I don't know what's even the word to describe it, the very sort of like human-oriented, peaceful religion that aspects of Christianity, or maybe very early Christianity represented, specifically very early Christianity. And you look at that, but that's still at least becomes interpreted as, or is within the system of the Christian religion. It doesn't necessarily extend equally to the entire world unconditionally, So no, I think when you really look at something like the non-aggression principle, and there might be tie-ins with Eastern philosophy and stuff that I'm less familiar with. When you look at tie-ins to the I'm sorry. When you look at the non-aggression principle as it was developed by basically modern era libertarians and its predecessors, because obviously it's a very simple concept. I think that's something that really does grow out of a very specific philosophy, the Enlightenment, and the stuff that's downstream of the Enlightenment. I'll tell you this much. I don't hold the past. I don't hold the pre-Enlightenment past, and even the past post-Enlightenment in many cases, to the standard of the non-aggression principle. And I certainly don't hold any of our ancestors to the non-aggression principle. I actually don't really hold dogmatically to the non-aggression principle exactly. We'll get into that, but like I don't I don't hold the past to that at all. I think there is a reason why that became a phraseology and something like there has to be something that's being aspired to by libertarians, in my opinion. And this could be sort of like a Marxist struggle, like there's always been class struggle everywhere. Yes, but now we've enumerated it, we've defined it, we've we place limits on it. So I think it's a different thing. I'm not trying to hold the past. I'm not saying there's an eternal struggle and it's eternal into the future. I mean, well, probably it's eternal into the future, but that's kind of my take on it in general.
Yeah, I mean, very interesting. Very, very fair. Let's bring our guest in here. Brandon from Agora Nexus joins us. Brandon, thanks for coming on, man. How's it going? Oh, Brandon, we can't hear you. Is your mic on? All I'm hearing is static. Brandon, Penguin, can you hear him?
I cannot hear him. He's a dark hooded figure on here. Wait, there he goes. He's doing stuff. Brandon, type in the chat. Leave and come back. Oh. Not you, Sec. Brandon, leave and come back. See if that works. Wait, I can hear something now.
You can hear me now?
I can hear you now. Yes, I can hear you now. Sorry, it's static now. I can hear your voice. All right, adding stuff back.
All right, how about now? Everybody can hear everybody?
Yeah, I think everybody can hear everybody. We'll clean this up in post.
Okay.
Yes.
Brandon, welcome.
All right, welcome.
Yep. Brandon, what's the best way to find Agora Nexus, real quick, just while we're at it?
agorastnexus.com or on X under Agorist N, just the letter N, Agorist and the letter N. And yeah, I'm on X a lot. So yeah. Yep, just those two for right now.
Awesome. Well, while we were waiting for you, we kind of got started. Today we're talking about the non-aggression principle because, libertarians haven't talked about that enough. But but I think this is useful because you and I have been sort of engaging in conversations on X about, what are the limits or exceptions of this principle. And I think you and I agree on this. And it might be, do you have children, Brandon?
Yeah, I've got two. Well, I've got two biological and one stepson.
See, I think this might be the difference, man, because I get the impression that the people that seem to hold the non-aggression principle as an absolute in all cases tend to not have kids. Because I don't know about you, can assume it would be the same for you, but there's no higher principle for me as a father than to make sure that my children survive. You know what I mean? So we're just to get everybody up to speed who's listening. The conversation that's going on is that it's not moral or ethical to, let's say, steal a ladder to save your child from a fire, or to steal food to feed your starving children, etc. What are your thoughts on all this? I'll let you go for a while.
Yeah. Before I start, I do want to say that that agorism is consistent. Agorism is always the most consistent principle. So even if Konkin stated in New Libertarian Manifesto that even if what he was writing wasn't consistent, that the Reformation um, would be the Reformation of agorism would be the most consistent principle. So even if the words in New Libertarian Manifesto weren't consistent, that agorism was. And so I do want to state that clearly that that I do try to be as consistent as possible with agorism. And consistency is extremely important, because if you don't have consistency, then you might as well just be a Republican or a Democrat at the end of the day, because and I can go on and on about this, but to start, JFK Democrat, when JFK was in office, they would be considered more Republicans now. So it just kind of shows you, and then we've got the examples of like Occupy Wall Street. They were against like big pharma, and now they're like pro pharma vaccine, and they were like against wars, and now they're for wars and all of that. So consistency is super important. And then you have the Tea Party movement with the Republicans. So that's the important thing about consistency, is that, and what I love about agorism is because over long periods of time, agorism will still be the same. What we're fighting for today will still be the same. Same thing that we're fighting for in 50 years, to where if you're a Republican or Democrat or whatever, what you're fighting for today could be completely different tomorrow. So, and so even if I say something inconsistent, that's inconsistent here, agorism is always the consistent principle. But yeah, to get on with your question, and another thing I want to state is that, and you said it very well, is that most of the people talking about the non-aggression principle, in terms of like, I would never, ever, ever break it for any circumstance. Most of these people, like you said, don't have children. And I think that most of these people really haven't been in life-threatening situations. And so, I think most of the debate around what they're talking about with the non-aggression principle right now is it, and the debate has been, okay, would you break it or whatever? But I think the debate should have been, okay, what is a non-aggression principle violation? Because most of them haven't been non-aggression principle violations, right? Like, if there was like a kid drowning or something, the kid was trespassing on private property or whatever, and the kid was drowning, and you're just walking by, and you would have to like trespass to, and you knew that kid didn't live there, right? But you had to like trespass to save him. If the property owner stopped you from saving him, the property owner would be the one violating the non-aggression principle. So there's most of these are not non-aggression principle violations. So I want to make that clear. But in terms of like, okay, there is, if you're just taking a ladder in a shed, right, to save your kids, burning in a building, that wouldn't technically be a non-aggression principle violation. But if, like, let's say you were like in like a New York City type of area, and there's a fire, and there's some dude walking by with the ladder, right? I'd be like, hey, give me that ladder so I can save my kids, right? And he'd be like, no. And he just like stands there, and he like wants to like listen to your kids like burn in a fiery death because he gets off on like suffering or whatever. I guess and I guess some people do, like, it's just weird. Like there's like malignant narcissists that like direct that get like sexual pleasure from it or something. But
Yeah, those are the people that rule over us. But yeah.
yeah, they actually say that the psychologists who like study Trump and stuff, they're actually saying that he's a malignant narcissist, so he gets off on suffering or whatever, which is just weird. But yeah, so to go back to my example, if this dude was just like standing around at the ladder and like not giving it to me, would I just like stand there and just like listen to my kids like scream to death, scream in a fiery death? Absolutely not. I just couldn't do it. I would fucking punch this dude, take this fucking ladder, and save my kids. Simple as that. So like, do I want to? And I want to make another thing clear too, is that like, how principled I am proud of our movement in one way, because the people who are talking about this, nobody in the conversation or the debate was ever talking about, they were never endorsing non-aggression principle violations. They're never going out and say, yes, you have to this is something that none of us wants and nobody is endorsing. And it's the last thing that I would ever want to do ever. Right. But in this situation, if this dude was just standing around with the ladder and he was like smiling and laughing that my kids were like screaming and shit, wanting to escape, I would fucking punch this dude and take the ladder and save my fucking kids. Like, fuck you. So the people who would say I would never, ever do it, like you said, I don't think they have kids, first of all. And second of all, I don't really think that they've been into dangerous, life-threatening situations. So, yeah, and I think that putting I think the non-aggression principle is more of like a very, it's a guideline that we want to follow as much as possible, these people, they try to break it down to like an exact science, which I don't think that you want to do. And I'll go into a bunch of other debates I was talking about, in terms of like, this is, there are non-aggression principle violations that are actually non-aggression principle violations that aren't classified as such, and I'll get into those. But yeah, the exact science thing is just, there are some areas where it's like, okay, I may have to violate this. And let's say if you did do a non-aggression principle, like if I, beat the shit out of that dude and stole his ladder and like knocked him out and shit, I would want to, pay for his hospital bills or whatever. Right. But yeah, I can't say that I would never, ever, break it no matter what.
I agree with you on what you call the science, but first I want to say that that's not my first point. My first point is it's the non-aggression principle. I said earlier that I don't like hold to this dogmatically, because I know what the NAP is to libertarians. Okay, like I'm well versed in the libertarianism, even if I'm not like, well, I am listening. I am still actually pretty regularly interacting with like self-described libertarian content, I guess. But I'll put it to you this way: it's a principle. It is not like a law or a ruling. That it is not like just what we discussed about religion. It's not my religion. I have a religion. It's not something. It is not something that you're going to examine at a micro level and come with all these examples. Is this allowed? Is this allowed? What if this? What if that? Another thing, like you're discussing, like the whole basis of this conversation is coming up with unusual examples. I know that's how you test these things, but you're coming up with these unusual examples and far-fetched and far-flung examples. But if you kind of really take it seriously as a principle, I'm not worried about those specific examples. Those things have existed in society. There are long-standing traditions. There are civilizations and societies all over the world and long-standing tradition of civilizations going back thousands and thousands of years, well before written records. But there's stuff like common law and tradition, just cultural traditions that, but even more concrete things like common law that deal with these things. Like these things have come up, like they've at least been written on and used on and debated before, even sans the NAP as understood by like modern day or current day libertarians. So if we treat it like a principle, I'm more interested in the principle completely on the other scale of this. So I'm more concerned with the principle of like, do you want to build a society where there's overall less coercion on the societal level? Like there should be less aggression and less coercion in the managing of society. The thing that we're actually talking about here, politics. And yeah, there shouldn't be, there shouldn't be theft, but almost everybody agrees there shouldn't be theft basically at all. Most people. I think that people think there shouldn't be robbery or assault or burglary and stuff like that, or rape. And these things, of course, do happen, but like they're obviously something that there's sanctions against that are completely supported throughout society. But in terms of the NAP and talking about this libertarian theory of aggression, I think it's more. Yes, we want to talk about the small scale stuff, but that's like I have a tradition in my life that discusses those minute aspects of life and what the exact ruling are. It's called. I am Muslim, right? If you were Jewish, then the Jewish would go on and on and on and debate these things back and forth in the Talmud or whatever. Like you can have these things, but at least there, like God is involved. In terms of this thing, I'm more concerned about a society that's built on as little coercion and as little aggression as possible in the governing of that society. And governing doesn't have to be, by the way, the state, but it often is the state or with stuff adjacent to the state. But like how things are governed in society, where we're not, as many people are living their lives and doing their actions voluntarily. Yes, people will. There are, like, if you have something, a popular enough idea, people will do and participate in it voluntarily because they view it. Maybe it's not perfect, but it's better than the alternative, and the people it'll sort out. So a lot of state-based politics is basically forcing a large number of people to do. I mean, and not even that, but like forcing large numbers of people to do things that are against their interests or that they don't want to do through coercion. And there's finer points, obviously, in governing a society and governing even as a community or governing a state. Beyond that, where you could argue it's necessary for this reason, necessary for that reason. I would probably generally say, hey, I'm not even arguing that there should be the concept of a state or vestige of a state. That's really, I want to start from the principle first instead of just naming the desired outcome and trying to work backwards to it. I'm saying there should be a minimal amount of conversion and a maximal amount of forceful coercion. Maybe it's even better to define coercion in that case, and minimal amount of use of force and to kill people. Reminds me of just libertarian discussion in general, where like, first of all, the main thing I care about is like, besides like the Federal Reserve stuff, that's pretty important actually. But then war, I'm more concerned about war. And there's a broader base of people that actually care about the war situation as well. So it actually kind of works out. But let's handle that first, and let's move down the ladder of like abolishing the fire department, which, by the way, I've never had a chance to get into, but I don't believe it necessarily. But that's a great discussion to have, actually. But at the end of the day, like, we got to remember what we're aiming this principle at, and that is the everyday large-scale coercion of the state, and then obviously things that are adjacent to the state too, which we always define as the greater state. I don't even think I got into the other point, but that's kind of my basic overall first tier of views in as far as this topic goes.
So let me lay out, and I appreciate the the overall thought on that, Penguin, where it's what does this principle have as an effect on all of society, and then, like you said, minor details can get worked out amongst free people and free communities as these things arise. And I think in practice that's how things will work. But for me, I was a natural law sort of ANCAP for, I don't know, over a decade or so. And even at my most absolute on the nap, uh, I never really thought that it would be a bad thing for me to save my children, right? But since then, I've kind of, I don't necessarily think of these things as a quote unquote natural law, uh, and sort of a history is the counter argument to that. I don't think these things are necessarily quote unquote natural in the sense they come from outside of humans. But what I think of these things as, including concepts like property and principles like the non-aggression principle, I think these things are principles, or like Brandon said, guidelines, rules of thumb for us to mitigate conflict when interacting and having relationships with other humans. If we have these overall principles, it's just a sort of more beneficial way for us to live. If we have concepts like property, it sort of mitigates conflict amongst humans. So there's no arguing about who owns what or whose is what or what, all these sorts of things. These are beneficial for human flourishing. So I think of things less in terms of morality and more in terms of self-interest. I've read maybe too much Nietzsche and Stirner, but that's kind of where I come from with this at these days. I think of these things as beneficial ways for me to live my life. It's not an absolute principle for me. It's like you said, an overall guideline, a rule of thumb. My life seems, in my children's life, 99.99% of the time, seems to be better if I act in a non-aggressive way. If I do not initiate violence on members of my community, my children, my people I know, relationship. It seems to be voluntary interaction will always benefit me more than violence. There are a few exceptions, like Brandon brought up. Your child's burning in a building, and somebody won't let you give you their ladder. You're taking that ladder and you'll deal with the consequences later. Now, I wonder if maybe we need, and I appreciate Brandon bringing up the fact that Tonkin even said, hey, listen, my word is not law here. This is a principle that needs to be updated and expanded upon as time and culture changes and new situations arise. He stated that over and over in interviews and a number of his works. These things need to change as new information arises, right? So maybe we need either another principle or another set of principles concerning, what you might call like property violations. So something that you could, because the non-aggression principle is, when is a principle around the idea of when it's appropriate to use force. So sometimes there's certain situations where maybe you're technically violating somebody's property, right? But maybe it's not appropriate to use force in that scenario, and there should be some sort of restitution involved later on, right? So let's say, and maybe this is something that individual communities and mediation organizations would sort of resolve, through, like Penguin said, through like sort of common law and custom and that sort of thing. But like, let's say I was in the wrong for taking the guy's ladder that you were talking about, and I punched him, and I saved my child. Now, I don't think what I did was necessarily wrong, but let's say I I owe you some restitution. Okay, fine. You know what I mean? And then me and that person can work that out later, but I would not call this necessarily aggression. We need almost another set of terms and principles for if that's what we're going to be talking about, going forward. But that's where I'm coming at it from with all this.
I guess a few thoughts on that, and I'll let Brandon kind of jump in. I don't have that much to say, but again, like you said, me and Brandon agree. Like it's a principle. I mean, it's not a diehard law that we have to say is so solid that we have to test the limits of it. But like I said, it's a great way to live your life. But in the case of the latter situation, I mean, there's a few different things. I think we're all in agreement. Yeah, you got to pay. If the guy needs to go to the hospital, you pay his hospital bill. If the guy needs restitution, that's a thing. That's a thing that's existed for a long time. And a jury trial. If there's a criminal court, then the idea of a jury trial. I mean, I think what would a jury say in that situation? Or if it weren't a jury, let's say it was a more informal community or a more informal method of dealing with such a problem. It's like looking at that. It's like, what? Everybody, who's going to really think you're in the wrong in that situation? If that guy was, and specifically in the way Brandon described it, that guy was standing there and smiling. Well, I mean, let's make it egregious, right? There's witnesses. That guy will not let you have he has a letter. He will not let you get the letter. There's really no cost to him giving you the letter. There's no risk really in that. I mean, I don't suppose there is, right? So what would a jury, what would the community, what would the neighborhood say about that? I'm not trying to get back to let's govern the society by neighborhoods thing, but there's a lot of ways to look at that situation that I think is certainly not unprecedented. Just like the idea of the NAP, there's no way that's unprecedented. But yeah, the way it was put forth by libertarians in the 20th century is sort of, it's progressive in the literal sense of the word, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. And you guys both, I agree with both of you guys on this. I think when you really, people try to break this down into scientific terms, and this is where I want to get into you'll see Hoppians do this a lot. And what they want to do is they want to break it down into scientific terms to where it's okay, we're making a society based off of the non-aggression principle, and we're making the non-aggression principle pretty much law. So if anything goes against the non-aggression principle, it's against the law. So they're trying to break it down in a scientific manner. Okay, everything about this has to be, scientific, but there's problems with that, and I'll bring them up here. So if you're creating a society based off of this, there's several issues here. There's one is that, and I got to a debate about this, is that, okay, the problem is that there's gray areas with the non-aggression principle. Okay, so for instance, and they wouldn't consider this to be a non-aggression principle violation, but I would. And the example I used is very severe, extreme, and I want to emphasize severe and extreme psychological abuse. Okay, so and I'll explain why it's a non-aggression principle violation and the similarities to other non-aggression principle violations in this very extreme, egregious example that I'm going to use. But and the reason why I'm using an extreme example for this is because I believe that most psychological abuse cases probably are not non-aggression principle violations. But there might need to be a new definition of the severe psychological abuse, and the reason why they don't want to classify this as a non-aggression principle violation is because if and I can see it like in terms of law, like, okay, like, you wouldn't really want like if somebody were to give like one of these woke liberals PTSD because they called him a retard or something, that wouldn't be, just calling somebody a retard wouldn't be a non-aggression principle violation, and it'd just be extremely ridiculous, right? So that's a reason why, okay, if we classify this as a non-aggression principle violation abuse, where do we draw the line, right? But and this is I would consider this a gray area, and so the example I'm going to use is, okay, let's say that there's a kid who's like in foster care or whatever, and his foster parents have like an immaculate record, and if he like reported something, nobody would believe him, and it would probably make the situation worse with his foster parents, right? And let's say the reason why he's in foster care is because he was like sexually abused and raped, okay? And his foster parents play the there's a videotape of it, and his foster parents got a hold of it somehow, some way, either through the internet or whatever, and they play it every single day as he comes home from school, okay? And so he's got nowhere else, like, this is the only place that he can live. He's really got nowhere else to go. He can't really, like, he can go outside and stuff, but I mean, if like the parents play it loud enough or whatever, it's just like to put his stuff away or to like take a shower, he's got to like suffer through this, okay? Well, they wouldn't really classify this as a non-aggression principle violation, even though if they're like a malignant narcissist and they like got off on like tormenting their, foster child. And, it would, this would definitely be, in my opinion, this would definitely be because you're reintroducing trauma. So whether or not he wants, a lot of people look at feelings and stuff as subjective, but you're reintroducing trauma to this child. So no matter what, even if he doesn't want this to bother him, it will bother him, right? Because they're reintroducing this extremely traumatic experience to him, first of all. Second of all, they're intending to harm him. So there's intention to harm, so that they get something out of it, right? So I would classify this like what Rothbard classifies a non-aggression principle violation, like pollution. Pollution is, in terms of like if you're, polluting the air and you're, affecting your neighbor, but in a way that you can't even prove, and you're harming him, let's say his air, and he doesn't even know that you're harming his physical body, you are still committing a non-aggression principle violation, even if you're not intentionally trying to harm him. Well, in this case, you are intentionally trying to harm him, and this video, reintroducing his trauma to him, would bother him no matter what. And not only that, but there's scientific evidence that shows that that severe psychological abuse, and especially reintroducing trauma and having severe psychological abuse, actually causes physical, you can see physical damage to the brain. So not only is there intent to harm here in this case, but you're also showing intent to harm, or there is an intention to harm the victim, and there is actually physical damage to the victim's brain. So this has everything. This has everything that a non-aggression principle violation would have. And the video would be like pollution or whatever. would be along the lines of pollution. You're actually hurting this person physically. So, and there's scientific evidence to back up, hey, severe psychological abuse causes, physical neurological damage. This is scientific evidence. This is 100% fact and backed. But according to them, this would not be a non-aggression principle violation. And they'll never admit that a lot of these Hoppians will never admit that this is a non-aggression principle violation, because where would you draw the line, right? Can you cause neurological damage just by calling somebody a retard, or can you give them PSTD just by calling, like a woke liberal or retard or whatever? So, and I don't think just like name calling is a non-aggression principle violation, but like in this severe example, and I use this extremely severe example because I believe that there are cases of severe psychological abuse that would be non-aggression principle violations. And I want to show you guys more examples of society and like the non-aggression principle and how they're using that. But I'll let you guys build off of that, or if you guys have anything to add to that, go ahead.
Really quickly, and I'll let Seth give most of the response to that. But really quickly, I think a lot of that comes from, I don't want to lose the thought. A lot of this comes from the idea or the desire to make, and I guess that's sort of a point to a lot of libertarians in the way they think, but to make the non-aggression principle it's almost entirely the main law or main principle or whatever you want to call it specifically that governs society. So we're going to have this one rule. Like it's so simple. Let's just have this one rule. There's this one thing that you cannot do this bad, but it's like an umbrella. It covers all the bad things that we don't want. And anything else is either like allowed, even if it's not great, or there's obviously some debates on the edges about coercion, and then there's fraud is always one that's brought up. But it's the idea that like we're governing society. There's no anything more complicated than this one rule, which I mean, yeah, okay, right. I still think this doesn't really hold to be true. But it's this idea that like, I don't like the state. I don't like the government. I don't think government should exist at all, right? So I work backwards from that. And I try to make this idea that like, well, if there has to be this one basic rule that and everything else, all rulings or everything, all interactions are governed by, all rulings are stem off of that one rule. It's pretty simple. Obviously, nothing's completely simple on the edges, but it's pretty simple and easy to define as much as possible. And anything more complicated than that would require a much more complicated governing system or a state or something like that. I think that's where the idea comes from, having this one simple rule. And the idea also that people want like a pure ideology. So they don't want they want an ideology. Like we were talking about with Democrats and Republicans. Those are not ideologies to the extent that over time they flip completely to different positions. Sure, they're political parties. That's like the opposite of an idea. What people want is this purely ideological. Like there's this idea, principle, you don't depart from it, and it solves all the problems. But why can't but outside of that framework, like there can just be other bad things. And yes, who has the authority to deal with that? Over the years, and like I said, over the past few years, we have only done a few recordings. Like I've evolved a lot on a lot of things. I mean, a lot of society is, we live in a status society, but like either in the past or current, even in some cases, they're vestige of this currently. Like, things are somewhat decentralized. Like there are not central authorities for everything. There is a procedure and this and that and the other. And I mean, obviously things have gone in a far more centralized direction than they did in the past for a variety of reasons, including practicality, but also including the introduction of more rational management of society and bureaucratic management, and also state-centric thinking. as opposed to just more government, like the state-centric thinking around that. But long story short, society is still somewhat decent, it's policed and everything, but there's still obviously there's not absolute authority of like of the state. It's not, I don't want to just use this example like North Korea, like what is the party cadre on every block or something like that. And so there are a multitude of different, I don't know where I'm going with this, sorry. There are a multitude of different ways that in society that isn't just directly stemming from the president of the United States and the Congress that like is affecting of like how we govern our communities and our society. So long story short, like we're not in a fully totalitarian world, and also to be in a fully ideologically anarcho-capitalist or whatever you want to call it world where like there's just one rule that governs everything, and there's no governing structures, and there's very little thing besides private arbitrators and private defense agencies, which I guess is just like an offshoot of insurance company. I don't know, but anyways, like there's just so little complexity and bureaucracy that there can't be governing structures. Sort of like, I mean, I don't whether or not what is real anarchism, but like the actual like what we would call the anarchist spirit of like there is just no governing structures. There's just no bureaucracies and hierarchies and this and that and the other. Well, it sounds. I mean, that's what the overall attitude and the desire is, and I think I'm not one of those guys. I mean, I just think that there would be a lot of administration and bureaucracy and government even without a state. Exactly. And yes, on the community level, things might have, and on various levels, like yes, there may have to be something other than one magic rule that solves all problems, but I don't think that's really an option on the table. I mean, in real life, look at again, coming from a legalistic religion, trust me, there are like gray areas surrounding every topic and every rule, no matter how simple it's worded from the beginning.
What both of you guys were saying, like, for some weird reason, it seems to me that a lot of libertarians don't actually trust market forces. And by market forces, I also include things like social consequences and ostracization and things like that being very effective at sort of, finding out answers to these gray areas. So, picture the example Brandon was saying, and I would consider that something akin to torture. Now, whether or not that's aggression or not, I think I tend to agree that that's aggression, but let's say it's not. I still think that's something that should be met with force, and I think that most people would. So even if it doesn't fit, somebody's definition of aggression, if you met that person with force, your actions would be, sort of judged by all of the community, and so would the actions of the foster parents, and you would deal with these things on a case-by-case basis, and your actions would literally be judged by all of your community. So you would have, maybe it's not something that needs to be met with force, but you would have lots of social consequences. Like, let's take fraud. Fraud's kind of an easier one here. Generally, fraud is considered aggression by most libertarians, and I will say it is theft, right? But I'm not sure like running some scam necessarily means that you can shoot them, and then we could get into conversations about proportionality. I think you are owed restitution, and if that person won't give you restitution, well, there's going to be consequences, but I don't know that needs to be force in that case. I think ostracization by your community and reputation damage might be enough to convince most people to just, pay up the restitution for the scam or the fraud that you just committed with somebody. So like this is what I mean. We might need, and it might do us no good to plan these, talk about these things now, but we do need separate, guidelines and principles that sort of go. And this is what Penguin said. I'm not sure the non-aggression principle encompasses all things. And like Brandon said, there's some gray areas. And these are spaces where we might need, other principles or other guidelines. And this might be something that gets hammered out on a case by case or a community by community basis, like in that, example with the foster kid. I think that kid's justified in using force against those foster parents. I really do. I would. And now that kid will have to explain himself to not only whatever arbitration organization, but the community as a whole, and explain and justify his actions to those people, right? And so will those foster parents. And now the people around them will hear both of those sides and act accordingly. And that's essentially market forces in action. So I don't even know that we need, maybe we don't need principles. And I think market forces might just do their job, not just in economics or economic transaction, but also in social transactions. So I don't know. What do you guys think about that? Do we need more than just the NAP?
Yeah, I think that I think the NAP is a good, would be a good guideline. But overall, I think that what you're saying is what I would prefer in a society where they mediate these issues and stuff like that, and they come to like consensus of, okay, like this is like actually this would be a violation of this person's rights, or this would just be like we have to we have to remove this kid from the in terms of that foster situation I was talking about. We have to remove this kid from the situation, and the parents would probably need some kind of like rehabilitation, or even like have to pay. I like Bob Murphy's kind of in terms of like.
Great guy.
Yeah, I like Bob Murphy's. He does a good talk on prison, private prisons would be more like Holiday Inns and stuff, right? Where you would be like working and paying off something, but it'd be like in a nice condition or whatever. And I don't want to go into. He can explain a lot better than I can, but if you want to look that up, I'm sure that you guys can find that somewhere. But Bob Murphy does a lot of good talks on that, and then he also does a great talk on like the market for security, and how like these like third party arbitration companies would work, and how these private security companies would work in a completely free society without government. But yeah, trying to break the NAP down like this, I see problems that I see things that are actually, that I would consider non-aggression principle violations that these people wouldn't. And I get why they wouldn't want to classify them as that. And I completely understand. And I wouldn't, because it'd be extremely difficult to draw the line. But like, even in terms of fraud, you can look up great examples of like how somebody could violate the non-aggression principle by using fraud, not in terms of like stealing your money, but let's say they like convinced this guy that he was crazy when he wasn't, and they got him to take like harmful, some kind of medication that had, most medication has some kind of side effect, right? That's somewhat harmful, but the reason why people take most of these medications is because taking the medication is more beneficial than the side effect. But like in terms of like this would be fraud, right? And they're doing it for like a motive, and they're like intentionally, harming this guy and putting him under like emotional stress and stuff like that, and making him believe that he's crazy when he's not. And they're getting him to take like, medication or whatever. And then one day they just like spook him out, right? And like he like jumps out of a window trying to escape or something. Like this would, this is, I would consider this is like in the fraud department. Like, yeah, this is non-aggression principle violation. I think that that may be some kind of like force or aggression, or even removal from the situation. Like, you guys cannot be around this guy because you're just like completely destroying this guy's life when he's like actually not having any issues at all. So
at that point, you're almost talking about murder. You know what I mean? And so
Yeah,
maybe
even
we
though-
should be differentiating like different types of fraud. So like, okay, somebody pulls the Nigerian prince scam on you and gets some of your money. I don't know if we're justified in shooting that guy. You know what I mean? But that guy owes you money, right? So maybe we can solve things like that through social pressure and market forces. But let's say somebody tells you that a product is safe and effective and it actually kills a lot of people. Now you're talking about something much more serious. And I think you are justified in using force on that particular company to achieve restitution or justice in some way. And maybe this is why, there's the classical liberal tradition of life, liberty, property, and those things are in that order for a reason. Where if you're harming life, that is, the worst, and followed by harming somebody's liberty, and then followed by harming somebody's property. So somebody scams you through fraud out of money, I'm not sure you're really justified in like shooting that person, but I think you are justified in achieving restitution through mediation, or like I said, ostracization or social pressure, something along those lines. But somebody commits fraud like you were saying, and you convince somebody to jump out of a window, or some company poisons a bunch of people saying a medicine was safe and effective when it was not. Now you're talking about a violation of somebody's life or liberty, and I think that is justified in using force. But they're both under this umbrella of fraud. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. But I don't think the problem is that I don't think that that libertarians would necessarily, like, some of the situations of fraud, they wouldn't necessarily consider it fraud or a non-aggression principle violation, which I consider a problem, because it would fall under fraud. Just like my example of that psychological abuse case would fall under like pollution. But yeah, it's extremely interesting, like how they want to break down a society like this, and like what these Hoppians want to do is they want to say, okay, this is our one law, is the non-aggression principle, right? And I think that would work, probably way better than any state. I think that there'd be a lot of there would be some of these gray areas that we've been talking about that would need like, mediation and community coming together to resolve these issues. But overall, I think it would work way better than the state. I think that there's a huge issue, and that's extremely immoral that they don't address in terms of this, or they do address it, but they're just like, oh, well, we can't solve it. And I don't know, for whatever reason. And me and Jeremiah got into an argument with Zulu and a couple of his people about, child pornography, which is extremely immoral. Nobody should, have pictures and stuff like that of unclothed children in terms of that. And like, in terms of like, I don't think any society is going to be like successful or worth anything if they, when they involve sex and children. I that's not a society that's worth anything, because you're destroying your future at that point in time. So yeah, and the problem with that is, okay, if we make non-aggression principle law, okay, just having a picture of anything isn't a crime, right? But you don't want, how would you classify somebody just holding child pornography, right? Well, they don't really want to come up with a solution for this. And I know that there's like lots of different, like, okay, the non-aggression principle, like, the problem is that law is universal, right? So like, if you make possession of something illegal, well, there's no like government saying, okay, even though marijuana is illegal to possess, the government can hold as much of it as we want, and we can hold it to wait for your case and to prove that, okay, this is actually the marijuana that he had, right? So, but the problem is that when you don't have I can do it, but you can't government, you're making a law that is universal. So if something's illegal like marijuana or something, not even these companies could have it to hold on to it to prosecute you, because holding on to it would be illegal as well, because law is universal. So, but the solution to like child pornography, like, okay, we can actually make child pornography illegal. We should, and we absolutely can. You can have, so what you would do about that is, if there was like a report, somebody reported it, you would have like 2 or 3 witnesses come in, look at it, and you would have, and the defendant would have witnesses to verify that, okay, like what they're actually looking at, so that there's like no bias, oh yeah, that's it, when it's actually not. Because reviewing material on a computer is not possession. Okay. Because if I come over to your house and I look at your computer, I'm not in possession of your computer. I'm just looking at it. I don't own your computer. I don't own any of the contents on it. It's not mine, right? So just reviewing your computer is not possession. Even in Rothbard's, even according to Rothbard, that wouldn't be possession under like a libertarian principle or whatever. But so you would have multiple people review it, and then it's like, okay, well, you've only got witnesses, he said, she said, in court, right? Well, you could have devices that would detect it and be like, okay, we verified that there's actually like child pornography on that device with these other devices, and they would work like, they would just use like hash, right? So like in terms of like virus software, okay, virus software doesn't need to have the virus to detect viruses, right? So those devices would work like virus virus software, and then the people verifying the information would be like, oh, well, that's just a picture of his daughter playing in the bathtub with her brother when they were like 4 years old or something, right? Like, that's just like a baby picture everybody has. So that's, they would verify, okay, that's not actually like child pornography or whatever. So you would have like actual people verifying it, and then like, okay, how do you get it to court at that point and say this is actually the material that you had? Well, you would have a device that like a USB, you'd have a device where you throw it into your computer and say, okay, we're verifying what they're saying by using this device that stated at this date, at this time, with this device, that was actually on there, and then we've got the witness saying that it was actually on there too. So that's one way you could do it, but then it's like, okay, you would have to have like some kind of agreement, okay, to purchase property and to even live here, you would need to, not have this material. And then like when you're, and you're, since any guardian of children need to agree to this agreement too. And then when your children are of age, they have to sign this agreement as well. So it's not like a Lysander Spooner incident where it's like, I didn't sign shit. Right. So, but yeah, when you're, not a minor anymore, 18 or whatever age, you sign this agreement stating that you also will not, since your parents are no longer responsible for you, you need to sign this agreement, or you'll be like completely ostracized from our community or whatever. So stating that, okay, to own property or whatever, and I don't want to get into the details, but to own property or to sell property to whoever, I have to have this agreement signed. And anybody who's making the agreement also has to have proof that they've signed this same agreement or whatever. So there's things that you could do to resolve things like this, but I feel like they just like don't want to. And I know that it would make things a little bit more complicated than, we just have this one universal law and that's it. But I think that society is a little bit more, society is a little bit more complicated, and there are some great issues where you're going to have a little more than just the non-aggression principle.
Yeah, so we could obviously look at different kind of structures that are freer or more liberal or whatever, that obviously, or more. I was actually thinking of, so more free or more conservative. More free or more liberal than a totally statist, centralized society, but along conservative principles of like of more community based, or like based into institutions that have traditionally existed. But I think what you're describing actually conforms to essentially a NAP based framework, where like you could basically, so it depends on what you imagine this a NAP centric framework to look like. Again, I'm not necessarily married to the NAP as this special, except as an overall principle, and especially at the higher levels necessarily. I don't really flesh this out exactly. I'm just not
I see it as like an ethical framework, and these Hoppians, they're viewing it as like a legal framework, to where I view it as like an ethical framework. And go ahead. Sorry, I interrupted you.
Oh no, well, when you were saying scientific, and I think there is an aspect of that, like the immortal science of Marxist-Leninism, but like it's legalism to me. It's like you're being legalistic about this one principle in the NAP, and the reason is because you have to have this one principle. But kind of what I was saying, you could have a NAP framework. I'm not describing my perfect utopia here, but you could still have a NAP framework, and like I was kind of saying, along with the complexity of society and governing institutions, you can have like we were just talking about it. Obviously arbitration in courts, or whatever you want to call it, but like our arbitration, you could have insurance, and you could have, what was the other thing that you just said, Brandon? The kind of institution. Oh, contracts. Yeah, you can have arbitration in courts. You can have insurance. You can have contracts, a contract-based society, and that could still actually give you a society with a lot of rules, a lot of restrictions in both a good and a good sense. Essentially, a lot of rules, a lot of government or governance, which is essentially kind of the same thing as when you don't have to differentiate them. And I know, that's against the anarchistic spirit, obviously, but it depends on what you mean by that. In the sense that libertarians tend to mean that like a hyper liberal kind of market based society or whatever, that's less focused or doesn't have a state governing it. Exactly. Again, there's a whole spectrum of like what it means to be anarchist, depending on it's like the attitudinally just would not want to do that. I'm not talking about that because I'm not one of those guys. But like I would say, yeah, society that's maybe stateless or could be stateless or could be analogous to a stateless society, whatever, has a heavy element of governance through like insurance and arbitration and contracts. You can have all the rules and the restrictions you want in society, and they're not centralized either. So there's choice. Yeah, there's exit. There's options. There's not this geographic tendency, I guess, to create this contiguous area that you can sort of defend militarily, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, sort of governed by force, where it sort of befits these states to have this large contiguous landmass. You know what I'm saying? That's not the only way to govern things. You know what I mean? If you're not trying to do those things, especially in modern times of communication and everything. But yeah, I mean, that's still in line with being NAP centric at all, completely. You know, you have these kind of institutions that even if it's like, yeah, they don't technically violate a NAP, but we still have all these rules and regulations. Like, yeah, okay, that's fine. They're voluntary. And yes, along those lines, there's still other principles that you might want to hold. That may not be liberal enough for you in the older sense of the word. That may not be anarchistic enough for you. That may not be a lot of things. But it's a good starting point. And then from there, we can fine tune the edges.
Well, hey, I gotta wrap up here, but Brandon, we should do a part 2 on this. But I will say, whether or not child porn violates the non-aggression,
I have no idea. By the way, I have no answer for that one. I'm just not even going there.
I would say yes, but either way, as a father, I'm gonna beat that person half to death.
Yeah.
Just because I don't care. Yeah, but do whatever you want to me after that. But I'm gonna, and I think most parents would. So, you know, almost at the point where it doesn't matter if it violates the non-aggression principle or not, we're just not going to accept that from you. Do you know what I mean? Like all of society is going to beat you to death if you have that. So, or every parent in society anyway.
That kind of exists too. That kind of exists because they have those predator hunters, and they just started like beating up people, which is actually not good for a variety of reasons. But like that's kind of the thing. Like who's going to defend that guy? But I don't think that's actually necessarily good.
Well, I'll tell you who does.
I think there's free market solutions out there that are already trying to deal with deal with these predators. So like give them the free market thrives, right?
Yeah, and in some sense, the state currently protects the perpetrator. Like that's what a lot of our laws are based around, is protection of the accused, right? So, and also, they want to
until they're found guilty, but
right. Well, they want to stamp out vigilante justice because they don't want competition to their monopoly. So, like, if somebody rapes a daughter and the father goes and beats the living shit, puts that person in the hospital or kills them, the father's going to jail for longer than the rapist. You know what I'm saying? Whereas we might just handle these things as fathers or as mothers and parents in a free society in ways that are currently restricted. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, the example I was using is somebody just having some kind of stuff and not them actually doing anything with it, like them just owning a photo or a video or something. And under like a NAP, you can kind of restrict stuff like that if you're just going off of NAP in terms of like distribution. There's and I don't have time to get into it either, but in terms of somebody just having a photo, you'd have to like make some kind of contractual agreement, because again, you don't want to have a society where people could possess child pornography. I don't think the society is really worth anything if you involve sex and children in any way, shape, or form. But
Agreed.
yeah,
For sure.
Yeah, it's thorny. There's still a lot of problems with all those, and I do kind of have a disagreement about the vigilante justice thing. But I will say this: back to the original intro, not the one little thing that I may or may not cut out in the beginning before Brandon joined. But
they could do it peacefully. They could do vigilante justice peacefully, kind of like what some of these vigilantes do now, where they publicize they publicize it on social media and they get lots of their incentive is to get followers, to get money. Like peaceful vigilantes would be good. Ones that don't fall, aggress on the non-aggression principle, unless something was going down, at that moment, and they had to I don't know, but go ahead.
No, I'm seeing a lot of that stuff. Yeah, no. That exists too. I was specifically. No, that's a good point. But I just wanted to go back to the beginning. I wanted to get this out as my outro because the kind of premise to this whole discussion was that when you have kids, some of that stuff goes out the window, and a lot of these guys that are being super legalistic and autistic about this. I mean, let's just they're just being freaking nerds. They're childless autists. But I am a childless autist. I mean, at the end of the day, but I'm also of a certain age. I should have that. The fact that I don't have children is kind of irrelevant here. I get it still. I am of a certain age. I'm of close to sex age, not too many years younger. I don't know how old you are, Brandon, but I totally get that. You cannot legalistically argue of these things over the nap. If the neighbor's little girl is picking your flowers on your property, you can't launch the McNuke because you'd be nuking your own property, but you can bust out the 12 gauge or whatever, which of course the answer is always no. Obviously you can't do that, and I don't have to tell you why. I don't have to tell you why you don't have to do that.
Excessive. Also, a lot of people don't talk about this, but excessive punishment is a non-aggression principle violation. If somebody steals a candy bar, you don't chop. If a kid steals a candy bar, you can't chop off his fingers.
But Brandon, there's one weird rule. We have to have one magic rule to cover everything. It doesn't need to be debated or anything, right? That's the whole issue. So I just think that it is a sign of kind of immaturity and lack of context with the wider world, and also history. I mean, I did point out there's historical precedents for all this, so I just wanted to kind of say that, I mean, I think the children thing can be part of it. Having children can change your perspective if you went from one perspective to another, and I think that also just the idea that you're just in this other world where you're just not even interacting with the realities of daily life in the same way, and you're just on the internet just typing on these discourse, type, debating, having debates on Discord and podcasts with very few listeners, but not to be self-referential here, but honestly, we're connected with the wider world. In the wider world's context, we see things a little bit differently than Discord debates.
Well, on that note, Brandon, you down to do a part 2 on this? I think there's more we can kind of flesh out here.
Yeah. Let me know. My schedule is super busy for December, so I'll have to be in advance and on a good date. But yeah, I'm definitely down for sure.
All right. Yeah, I'll reach out to you, see what we can hammer out. But thanks for coming on, everybody. Go follow Brandon on Twitter. Say, what's that Twitter handle again?
Agorist N, or you could just search Agorist Nexus, AGORIST space Nexus.
Yeah, they do a lot of good content over there, so everybody should go check them out. Brandon, thanks again, man, and everybody be excellent to each other. Peace.
Thanks.
Ciao.